Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. Today we are going to be taking a look at a pretty fascinating book called Of Boys and Men by Richard V. Reeves.
Yeah, this one is really interesting.
Yeah, and it's tackling a topic that I think is really relevant right now.
Definitely.
And this whole question of like, are men struggling in today's world?
hmm
And Reeves argues that they are in a bunch of different ways.
Yeah, he doesn't just focus on like the obvious things like, career setbacks or that kind of thing.
Right.
He's really saying that the modern male is facing challenges across all these different areas of life, like education, work, even family life.
Right, and that's kind of what we're going to unpack today.
Yeah.
Like WHY, this might be happening, and,
Yeah.
and what it means for all of us, not just the guys.
Exactly.
So are you ready to kind of dive in?
Absolutely.
Really?
I think you'll be surprised by some of the things we find out.
I think so too.
For example, you might assume that in like these really gender egalitarian countries like Iceland, men and women would be like totally on equal footing when it comes to education.
Yeah, you'd think so, right?
Right, but Reeves actually presents some pretty startling data showing that that's not the case.
Really?
Yeah, even in Iceland, women are far outpacing men when it comes to higher education.
Wow.
And it's not just Iceland, it's actually a global trend.
So this isn't just like an American thing?
No, not at all.
Yeah.
It's happening all over the world. Girls are outperforming boys in schools at like every level.
Whoa.
Yeah, and he cites all these statistics from the OECD
Mm-hmm.
showing that globally, girls are ahead in reading.
Okay.
And while boys have traditionally done better in math, they're starting to fall behind there too.
Wow, that's a pretty significant shift.
It is.
So do you think this gap is mainly due to like differences in resources or opportunities?
I mean, those are definitely factors.
Yeah.
But Reeves argues that there's more to it than that.
Okay.
He points out that in the U.S., the gap in school readiness between 5-year-old boys and girls is actually larger than the gap between rich and poor children.
What?
Yeah.
That's crazy.
This is pretty mind-blowing.
That suggests that there's like a more fundamental difference at play, right?
Right.
Could it be like how boys and girls develop differently?
That's a big part of his argument.
Okay.
He goes into the science of brain development.
Mm-hmm.
And he says that the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that's responsible for impulse control and planning,
Right.
that actually matures about 2 years later in boys than in girls.
Okay. That makes sense.
Right.
I mean, anyone who's ever, tried to reason with a teenage boy
Exactly.
knows that their impulse control is not exactly their strong suit.
Right.
But so how does this actually play out in the classroom?
Well, imagine you're a young boy
Okay.
and you're in a classroom setting.
Mm-hmm.
Your brain is still like wired for novelty and excitement,
Yeah.
but you're expected to just sit still
Yeah.
and pay attention and follow directions.
Sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It can be.
Mm-hmm.
And boys with these underdeveloped prefrontal cortices, they might have a much harder time focusing and controlling their behavior,
Oh.
which can lead to them being labeled as disruptive or inattentive.
Right. So it's
And
not that they're like inherently less capable.
Exactly.
It's that their brains are literally on a different timetable.
Exactly. It's not about intelligence. It's about development.
Okay.
And this isn't just like, speculation or anything.
Right.
Robert Sapolsky, a Stanford biologist who studies the teenage brain,
Mm-hmm.
he said that like the dopamine system, which drives that need for excitement and novelty,
Yeah.
that can completely overwhelm the still developing prefrontal cortex in boys.
So it's like hitting the gas pedal before the brakes are fully installed.
Exactly.
That's a great way to put it.
And it's not just the prefrontal cortex that's maturing later in boys, right?
Right.
The cerebellum, which is involved in emotional regulation and cognitive abilities,
Mm-hmm.
that also reaches full size later in boys.
It does.
Reeves cites this neuroscientist, Galkson Akurek.
Yeah. Who says the cerebellum matures around age 11 for girls,
Yeah.
but not until age 15 for boys.
That's a 4-year difference.
4 years. That's huge.
Yeah, and so, obviously we're talking about averages here,
Right.
but these biological differences,
Mhm.
they do seem to be having a real impact on how boys are performing in school.
Especially during those like crucial middle and high school years.
Exactly.
Mm.
When those social pressures are also starting to ramp up, their
Mhm.
brains are still trying to catch up.
So we're seeing how this is affecting boys in education.
Mm-hmm.
But what happens when they enter the workforce?
That's where things get even more complicated, I think.
Yeah.
And this is where Reeves's argument about the decline of the traditional provider role comes in.
Mm-hmm.
He points out that as women have achieved greater economic independence,
Right.
that old model of the man as the sole breadwinner,
Yeah.
it's fading.
Which is a good thing in many ways.
But the problem is that, like, societal expectations haven't really caught up to this new reality.
Right.
Men are still often judged by their ability to provide.
Yeah.
But the way to do that is changing really rapidly.
And all of this is happening against a backdrop of some pretty dramatic economic changes.
Oh, absolutely. We've got globalization, automation,
Right.
all these things that have led to a decline in those traditionally male-dominated fields like manufacturing, leaving a lot of men feeling displaced and uncertain about their future.
Yeah, so you have this perfect storm brewing where men are grappling with like a changing definition of masculinity,
Right.
while simultaneously facing all these economic challenges
Exactly.
that undermine their like traditional role as providers.
Yeah, and all of that's happening while men are also facing a friendship recession.
Wait, a friendship recession.
Yeah, it sounds kind of funny,
Yeah.
but it's a real thing.
What does that even mean?
So Reeves highlights all this research showing that men are increasingly isolated
Really?
and lacking close friendships.
Huh. And get this, 15% of men report having no close friends at all.
15%.
Yeah.
That's a lot of people.
It's heartbreaking, and I imagine this isolation only makes those other challenges even worse.
Absolutely. It creates like a vicious cycle.
Right, where men feel lost, alone, unsure of where to turn for support.
Yeah.
And this lack of connection has some really serious consequences.
Like what?
Well, Reeves points out that suicide is now the biggest killer of British men under 45.
Oh, wow.
That's a pretty alarming statistic.
It really is.
And it shows just how urgent it is that we address these issues.
We can't afford to just ignore this anymore.
Exactly. We need to start paying attention.
So where do we go from here?
Well, Reeves offers some pretty bold ideas for tackling these challenges.
Okay.
But I think we should probably save those for the next part of our deep dive.
Yeah, good idea. We've got a lot more to unpack.
We do. We've only just scratched the surface.
All right. Well, stay tuned, everyone. We'll be back soon with more on Of Boys and Men. See you then. Welcome back, everyone.
So let's get back into those solutions that Reeves talks about.
Yeah, let's start with education.
Okay.
You remember those biological differences we were talking about?
Yeah.
Well, Reeves thinks that maybe we need to rethink our whole approach to education.
Really?
Yeah, even starting as early as kindergarten.
Wow. Okay.
He suggests some pretty radical ideas.
Like what?
Well, one of them is redshirting boys.
Redshirting.
Yeah, meaning they'd start kindergarten a year later than girls.
So like starting at 6 instead of 5.
Exactly. Giving them an extra year for their brains to develop.
Okay. Do you think that would actually work?
It's a controversial idea,
Yeah.
but more and more people are starting to take it seriously.
Yeah.
The thinking is that this extra year could give boys' brains a chance to kind of catch up, especially that prefrontal cortex.
Right. So it's like giving them a head start
Yeah,
in terms of their development.
And Reeves points to some research showing that even small age differences can have a big impact on academic performance.
Really?
Yeah, especially in those early years.
I guess that makes sense.
He highlights one study that found if half of the English teachers from 6th to 8th grade were male, the reading achievement gap between boys and girls would shrink significantly.
That's pretty interesting.
It is.
I mean, if you think about it, this extra year wouldn't just benefit boys academically.
Right.
It could also help them like socially and emotionally.
Absolutely.
If their brains are more mature, they might be better equipped to handle the demands of a classroom setting.
Right, and all the social dynamics that come with it.
Yeah, totally.
And speaking of changes in the classroom, Reeves also argues that having more male teachers, especially in elementary and middle school, could make a big difference for boys.
Makes sense.
I mean, boys might be more likely to see male teachers as role models.
Especially when it comes to traditionally male subjects like math and science.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The ones where boys are already starting to lag behind.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But it's not just about role models.
What else?
Research shows that male teachers often have different teaching styles.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and classroom management techniques that can be really beneficial for boys who are struggling.
So what kind of differences are we talking about?
Well, for example, male teachers might be more comfortable with physical activity and hands-on learning,
Oh, okay.
which can be a better fit for boys who have a lot of energy to burn
Right.
and might not do so well in a traditional sit-down lecture-style classroom.
Okay, yeah, I can see how that would create a more engaging learning environment.
Yeah.
And honestly, having more men in caring professions like teaching could help break down those harmful gender stereotypes
Totally.
that suggest that men aren't nurturing or capable of emotional caregiving.
It's a win-win.
Yeah, for sure.
It sends a positive message to both boys and
All
girls,
right, that these roles are valuable for everyone.
not just women.
So how do we actually make that happen?
Well, that's the big question.
Yeah, because it's not exactly a secret that teaching, especially in the early grades, isn't seen as like a lucrative or prestigious career path.
Right, especially for men.
Yeah, so how do we change that?
Reeves suggests we start by raising salaries and improving working conditions for teachers in general.
Okay.
That would make the profession more attractive to everyone.
Right, regardless of gender.
Yeah, he also argues that we need to actively recruit men into teaching,
How would we do that?
maybe through targeted scholarship programs
Okay.
or even mentorship initiatives,
Yeah.
just making a conscious effort to change the perception of teaching as a woman's job.
Right, because if we want boys to succeed, they need to see that men can be successful in roles that involve caring for and educating others.
Absolutely.
And it's not just about providing role models.
Right.
It's also about acknowledging that not every child is cut out for a traditional academic path,
Exactly.
right? Not everyone is going to be a doctor or a lawyer.
Reeves is a big proponent of vocational education and training.
Yeah, especially for boys who might not thrive in a typical college prep environment.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He thinks our current system is too focused on getting everyone into college,
Mm-hmm.
which can leave boys feeling like failures if they don't fit that mold.
Yeah, that's true.
He wants to see more emphasis on hands-on learning
Okay.
that allows boys to develop practical skills and explore different career paths.
So instead of pushing every boy towards a 4-year degree, we should be giving them options.
Right.
Like maybe a boy who loves working with his hands would thrive in a technical high school,
Exactly.
where he could learn carpentry or welding or even coding.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that there are so many different ways to be successful and fulfilled.
Yeah.
And let's not forget the job market.
Mm-hmm.
There's a huge demand for skilled tradespeople,
That's true.
and those jobs often pay really well.
Yeah. And think about the satisfaction that comes from creating something with your own two hands.
Right? It's not just about the money.
Hmm.
It's about finding work that's both meaningful and sustainable,
Right.
whether it requires a college degree or not.
And this all ties back into what we were talking about earlier about the future of work.
Yeah.
We need to prepare boys for the jobs of tomorrow.
Not the jobs of the past,
Exactly.
right? Because the world is changing so quickly.
We're in the midst of a massive economic shift,
Mm-hmm.
and we need to equip boys with the skills to thrive in this new landscape
So how do we do that?
through vocational training apprenticeships, even community college programs.
Okay, so lots of different options.
Yeah, it's not one size fits all.
And speaking of the future of work,
Mm-hmm.
Reeves talks about getting more men into what he calls heel jobs.
Yeah, those are the jobs that are expected to grow the most in the coming decades.
Could you remind us what those are again?
Yeah, HEAL stands for Healthcare Education Administration and Literacy.
Okay.
So they often involve caring for others, teaching, providing social services.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a problem. These fields are currently dominated by women.
Okay, so how do we encourage more men to pursue these careers? Well, Reeves suggests a few things.
Like what?
First, we need to change the perception that these are feminine jobs.
Right.
We need to move past these outdated gender stereotypes.
Yeah, like the idea that men aren't suited for roles that involve caring. Right. So it starts with how we talk about these jobs.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
We need to highlight the skills and qualities that men bring to these roles.
What kinds of things?
Things like leadership, problem-solving, critical thinking.
Makes sense.
Reeves also suggests that we need to make these jobs more financially attractive to men.
Because a lot of these jobs, especially in the caring professions, are underpaid.
Exactly.
So he's talking about raising salaries, offering better benefits,
Mm-hmm.
maybe even providing financial incentives like scholarships or loan forgiveness.
It's about making a conscious effort to diversify the workforce and create more opportunities for men in these growing and vital fields.
Yeah, because these are the jobs of the future,
Right.
and we need men to be a part of that. Okay, so we've talked about education and work,
Mm-hmm.
but what about men's role in families?
That's another key piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, how does Reeves address that?
He believes we need to redefine what it means to be a father in a world where women are no longer economically dependent on men.
Right. He talks about the rise of the new dad.
Exactly.
What does he mean by that?
He envisions fathers who are actively involved in caring for their children,
Mm-hmm.
not just providing for them financially.
Right.
And this isn't just about changing attitudes.
What else?
He thinks we need policies that support fathers in their caregiving roles.
Like what kinds of policies?
Things like paid paternity leave,
Okay.
flexible work schedules, affordable childcare.
So fathers can be more present in their children's lives.
Exactly, without sacrificing their careers.
He even suggests that child custody laws should default to shared custody.
Yeah, that way
Oh.
fathers have equal rights and responsibilities when it comes to raising their children.
Those are some pretty bold ideas.
They are.
But I can see how they would create a more equitable system.
Right. One that benefits both parents and children.
Yeah, it's about rethinking the traditional model of the family and creating a system that truly supports all parents, regardless of gender.
And it's about recognizing the incredible value that fathers bring to their children's lives.
Yeah, I think a lot of people still underestimate that.
Studies show that children with involved fathers do better in all sorts of areas.
Really?
Yeah, they do better in school.
Yeah.
They have fewer behavioral problems.
Moo.
And they even tend to have better mental health as adults.
That's amazing.
It is.
So we need to move past this idea of the father as just a distant breadwinner
Right.
and embrace a new model of fatherhood that's centered on caregiving and emotional connection.
Absolutely. Reeves even goes as far as to suggest that we should redefine masculinity itself.
Really?
Yeah, to include these nurturing qualities.
Interesting.
He argues that our current definition of masculinity, which emphasizes stoicism and self-reliance, can actually be harmful to men.
In what way?
Well, it can prevent them from forming close relationships and seeking help when they need it.
So it's like it's hurting them more than it's helping them.
Exactly.
So it's time to let go of these outdated notions of what it means to be a man
Yeah.
and create a world where fathers can fully embrace their role as caregivers.
Right. Without feeling like they're less masculine.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
We've explored the challenges and we've looked at some potential solutions.
Yeah.
But before we wrap up, I want to circle back to that point about the political divide around these issues.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
It is.
And it's one that Reeves doesn't shy away from.
Okay.
He criticizes both the left and the right for their failure to adequately address these struggles.
So what's the problem?
Well, on one hand, you have progressives who are often focused on the injustices faced by women and minorities,
Okay.
which is important,
Yeah.
but it can sometimes lead to a dismissal of the very real challenges faced by men.
So it's like they're overlooking one group while focusing on another.
Yeah, and then on the other hand, you have conservatives who tend to romanticize the past
Okay.
and blame feminism for the decline of traditional masculinity, often overlooking the very real economic forces at play.
So both sides are kind of missing the mark.
Yeah, it seems like they're talking past each other.
And no one is really listening to what boys and men are actually saying about their experiences.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Reeves argues that both sides need to move beyond these ideological trenches and find some common ground.
If we want to make any real progress.
Right, he insists this isn't a zero-sum game.
Meaning?
We can support both men and women, boys and girls,
Right.
without pitting them against each other.
It's about recognizing that we're all in this together.
Exactly.
And that the well-being of one gender is inextricably linked to the well-being of the other.
Right, we rise and fall together.
And you know, when men are struggling, it affects everyone.
Exactly. It's not just a men's issue.
Right, it affects women, children, families, communities.
The whole fabric of society.
So it's in everyone's best interest to make sure that men are supported and thriving.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Reeves argues that investing in boys and men isn't just like the right thing to do ethically.
It's also the smart thing to do.
Yeah, when men thrive, everyone thrives.
It's like a rising tide lifts all boats.
I like that analogy.
So we've covered a lot of ground here. We've explored the challenges that boys and men are facing, and we've looked at some of the solutions that Reeves proposes.
Yeah, we've really delved into this book.
But before we wrap things up, I want to go back to that point about the political divide around these issues.
Yeah, it can be a really sensitive topic.
It can, and Reeves doesn't shy away from it in the book. He's critical of both the left and the right for their failure to adequately address the struggles of boys and men.
He says that, on the one hand, you have progressives who are often really focused on the injustices faced by women and minorities.
Which is, of course, important.
Absolutely.
But he argues that this can sometimes lead to a dismissal of the very real challenges faced by men.
And on the other hand, you have conservatives who tend to romanticize the past and blame feminism for the decline of traditional masculinity.
Right, and often overlooking those very real economic forces that are at play.
It's like both sides are talking past each other.
And no one is really listening to what boys and men are actually saying about their experiences.
Yeah, and Reeves makes the point that both sides really need to move beyond those ideological trenches
And try to find some common ground.
if we want to make any real progress.
Because ultimately, this isn't a zero-sum game.
Exactly. We can support both men and women, boys and girls.
Without pitting them against each other.
Right. It's not about taking anything away from women,
It's about making sure that men aren't left behind either.
because true equality means creating a society where everyone has the opportunity to thrive.
Regardless of gender.
Now, before we wrap up this deep dive into free boys and men,
Mm-hmm.
I want to ask you something.
Okay.
Reeves ends the book on a hopeful note, but he doesn't sugarcoat the challenges. He says that, we have the power to create a better future for boys and men,
Yeah.
but only if we're willing to have those tough conversations.
And actually take action.
Right. So
Oh.
what do you think that action might look like? What concrete steps can we take to address these issues in a meaningful way?
That's a great question. I think it starts with individual awareness.
Yeah, we need to be more tuned in to the pressures that boys and men are facing.
And willing to challenge those outdated notions of masculinity.
That can be so harmful.
So it starts with changing our mindset,
Absolutely.
both individually and collectively.
We need to move beyond this idea that men are supposed to be stoic and self-reliant and emotionally detached,
And create space for them to express their feelings.
to ask for help when they need it.
To embrace those nurturing qualities that are so essential for healthy relationships.
And while those individual changes are important, they're not enough.
Right, we need systemic change as well.
We need to advocate for policies that support fathers and families.
Like paid paternity leave,
Affordable childcare.
flexible work schedules,
We need to challenge gender stereotypes in the workplace.
and encourage more men to consider careers in those heal fields.
Right. It's about creating a world where men feel valued and supported,
Not just for their economic contributions.
but for all the unique qualities and perspectives that they bring to every aspect of life.
Because men are essential partners in building a more equitable and just society.
And we need them to be engaged, not alienated.
Empowered, not demoralized.
It's about creating a future where all genders have the opportunity to reach their full potential.
A future where both men and women can thrive.
As individuals, as partners, as parents, and as members of society.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Of Boys and Men, I want to leave our listeners with this question. What can you do in your own life to support the boys and men that you know and love?
Maybe it's having an open and honest conversation with your son about his dreams and his struggles.
Maybe it's advocating for policies that support fathers and families.
Maybe it's just being more aware of the pressures that men are facing and offering a listening ear or a helping hand.
Whatever it is, let's all commit to creating a world where everyone has the opportunity to flourish.
A world where boys and men can be their authentic selves.
A world where all genders can live with dignity, purpose, and joy.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
We hope it's given you some food for thought. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep asking those tough questions.